Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1379. Combining Forces. The curtain that enveloped the Antigonus palace instantly vanished. An indescribable aura returned to reality, causing the entire astral world to shake. Outside the world barrier that was covered in cracks, the terrifying, indescribable faces suddenly changed. The invisible barrier began to tremble violently as if it would collapse at any moment. Every continent on the planet within experienced an earthquake. It wasn't a serious one, just rather obvious. Above the 5 seas, waves surged, as if they had encountered a sudden tidal force. Amid the noon sky, the crimson moon suddenly appeared. Its color became extremely saturated and expanded in an exaggerated manner. It was as if it had hung off the roofs of every house. Other than that, the brown planet, orange planet, scarlet planet, gold planet, and blue planet lit up at the same time, emitting light of different textures. If one looked down from the cosmos, the entire Earth appeared to be swept up by an invisible storm and trembled in place. This was a slight change brought about by the outer deity's attempt to break the barrier. The aura that floated inside the ancient palace in the astral world had made them collectively recall that terrifying existence. Agitated by this, either a result of rage or madness, all of them tried to stop his revival. Compared to them, who were blocked outside the real world, the first to react was the magic wishing lamp in the pocket of Klein's main body. The sticky pale golden light penetrated through the Amon's enhanced seal, turning into a blurry and distorted figure. It stretched out its arm and pulled the Trunso's brass book into its palm. The rules that were written previously had all disappeared, and a new article immediately formed. Resurrection of the deceased is prohibited here. A faint grayish-white fog flashed and a familiar text appeared in front of this rule. All the following rules are ineffective. Even though he hadn't really resurrected and had yet to absorb the Fool's uniqueness and 2 Sequence 9 to Sequence 1 seer pathway beyond her characteristics, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings in Klein's main body could also control Sapphira Castle and use its status to direct its powers. At this moment, his existence and the fog of history had completed their interactions. Fragments of light began to distort as they merged into one, sometimes breaking apart, unable to completely form a piece of history. A sense of self-conflict appeared in that piece of history. True history clearly involved the prehistoric human soul, Klein Moretti, disguising himself as the Fool and establishing the Tarot Club. He became stronger 1 sequence at a time, and eventually reached the level of the true Fool. However, the present history was that Mr. Fool was a great existence that was awakening, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings from ancient times. He had finally awakened. At that moment, although the rule restriction put in effect by the genie using the Trunso's brass book could only be effective for less than a second, it still significantly weakened the will of the Lord of the Mysteries inside Klein's main body, as though he had suffered a fatal blow. As for Earth Mother and God of Steam and Machinery, they had given up on interfering with Amon's avatars, as though they wanted this Mr. Error to have the time to deal with the awakening Lord of the Mysteries. However, they, who clearly had some power to spare, didn't attempt to affect Klein's main body, but continued suppressing the primordial Demonis and the hidden sage. The subsequent attacks and interferences from the latter 2 were no longer intense, as if they were waiting for an outcome. To them, the resurrection of the Lord of the Mysteries was the achieving of their goals, produce a pillar as quickly as possible, and prevent entities that had animosity towards them from becoming the Lord of the Mysteries. In addition, the pathways that they were in didn't belong to the 3 pathways that were controlled by the Lord of the Mysteries. Furthermore, they didn't have any feuds or conflicts of interest with the other party. Amon, who was no longer affected, immediately changed his target and focused most of his attention on Klein's main body. There was no need for any explanation. They clearly knew that this was their greatest threat. Without any hesitation, the Amons raised their right hands at the same time and gently squeezed it, seriously, stealing the effects of the eternal daytime from the target. However, the almonds didn't give up influencing Klein. With their numbers, they split off a small number of members and looked at Klein, who was currently a Sequence 1 attendant of mysteries. Furthermore, Klein also bore the identity of Antigonus. The monocles of these almonds suddenly lit up. Using the authority related to doors, they moved Klein out of the real world and into the cosmos. In the dark and vast universe, Klein's figure appeared. Then, it instantly became thin, turning into a paper figurine. The paper figurine first had its belly bloated before giving birth to a paper baby. Then, it rapidly rotted into dust. Klein had used grafting and paper figurine substitutes to block the attacks of the almonds. At the same time, the other almonds had succeeded in stealing the effects of the eternal daytime from Klein's main body. However, in the next second, the effects of the eternal daytime were once again stolen back. This was the Lord of the Mysteries' control over powers from his pathway. Even though he had yet to fully revive, he had already begun this process. Amon's eyes flickered as he immediately gave up on Klein and focused on three matters. Most of them continued to steal the effects of the eternal daytime and resist the Lord of the Mysteries, while a small number of them locked onto Antigonus, who was sitting on the huge stone chair. They began to steal the other party's state of eternal slumber. In addition, all the almonds had dispelled the strengthening of seals, and even weakened them. Klein, who was no longer being attacked by Amon, similarly didn't counterattack. His attention was focused on his main body. The awakening of the Lord of the Mysteries was the biggest problem. At that instant, an illusory mark appeared on Klein's glabella. It was a strange door of light that was stained with hints of bluish-black. It constantly emanated a faint grayish-white fog. Klein began to snatch control over Sapphira Castle from the Lord of the Mysteries, so that it wouldn't be so easy for him to make use of the level and power. And with the Lord of the Mysteries not fully resurrected and having yet to accommodate the Fool's uniqueness and the corresponding Beyonder characteristics, he could effectively reduce his strength, allowing his failure rate to increase significantly and for the effects to be inferior. With his addition, with his control over Sapphira Castle, the fooling received by the Trunso's brass book immediately weakened. The chances of Amon's theft also increased. In the forsaken land of the gods, at the foot of the giant shadow formed by the ancient sun god, on the surface of the sea that was covered in all colors, words written in the most ancient language quickly appeared. The revival of the Lord of the Mysteries failed due to many interferences. With this sentence forming, as Klein fought for control over Sapphira Castle, the almonds once again stole the effects of the eternal daytime, effects that had augmented the Lord of the Mysteries. Elsewhere they had also stolen Antigonus's state of eternal slumber. Without any hesitation, the almonds transferred the state of eternal slumber to Klein's main body and gifted it to the Lord of the Mysteries. The ancient existence's aura immediately fell silent, but it quickly rebounded. At this moment, the corresponding text appeared on the weakly sealed Trunso's brass book. Resurrection of the deceased is prohibited here. Suddenly, the terrifying will in Klein's main body rapidly weakened, producing a strong urge to fall asleep again. However, this will was so powerful that, even after a long period of time, it was unable to completely wear it down. Under these two restrictions, it was still tenacious and slowly recovering. It also attempted to use tampering and fooling to get out of the predicament. Klein sensed that the other party was using Sapphira Castle's power, so he immediately focused and interfered. At the same time, the Evernight goddess, who was floating above the ancient palace, slightly relaxed her control over Amon's true body. She pulled back the bird-shaped, golden accessory and aimed its head downwards. Inside the bronze eye of the bird-shaped, golden accessory, illusory layers of doors surged out, allowing a drop of colorless water that had a strong aura of stillness to drop onto Klein's main body in the ancient palace. This was a drop of river water from the river of eternal darkness. While the Evernight goddess was doing this, Amon's actual body's attempt to escape by opening doors also tacitly slowed down. The drop of water plummeted at an extremely fast speed. The natural barrier formed by Earth Mother and the portrait formed by the god of steam and machinery simultaneously pulled back to give way for it. With a smack, the river water of the river of eternal darkness accurately dripped onto Klein's head and silently entered. The aura of the Lord of the Mysteries, which was slowly growing, immediately receded. It stopped its fluctuation and fell into a state of eternal slumber. However, this condition wasn't very stable, as if it could be broken at any moment. At this moment, the Evernight goddess's empty hand pulled out a gigantic sword from the void. The sword's surface was covered with orange-red light as it exuded the dawn of twilight, the aura of decay. This was the symbol of the Twilight Giant. The Evernight goddess's arm that was covered with short black fur extended, striking down with the exaggerated sword. She had always kept some energy as though prepared to deliver this moment. In the strange sound of the void shattering and decaying, the sword that was covered with the light of twilight slashed through the dome of the Antigonus Palace, causing the hanging corpses to drop to the ground. Right on the heels of that, it struck Klein's main body, which had yet to escape the state of eternal slumber. The portion of the awakening of the Lord of the Mysteries rapidly vanished, and the body began to wane uncontrollably. It broke down along with the Fool's uniqueness and the two sets of sequence 9-1 Beyonder characteristics in his body. They also collapsed and gathered together. Upon seeing this, Klein followed his plan without any thought. He used Sapphira Castle to pull down a quarter of the fog of history and enveloped it. Amidst the grayish-white fog, the Fool's uniqueness and the Beyonder characteristics fully converged. They frantically absorbed the fog of history around them, turning into a shapeless and dark liquid. This blob of liquid stretched out as though it was forming a strange, translucent hooded cloak, or a person whose internal organs and flesh were emptied out. The Fool's potion. The Amons reached out their right hands at the same time in a bid to steal the potion.